The following podcast is brought to you by the Johners Podcasting Network, found exclusively at WrestlingWithJohners.com.
I'm very fortunate to be joined by Mike Quackenbush. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jordan.
No, honestly, man, we've been trying to work this out for the last couple of weeks, and obviously, yes, should have done it yesterday, but I messaged you because schedules was a bit conflict, but I'm happy that we're finally sitting down and chatting with you, man. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad this worked out.
Yeah, so am I. So you are a very, very busy man from what I hear.
Who's telling you this stuff, Jordan? Who's giving you this inside scoop?
So pro wrestler, author, entrepreneur, pretty much I could go, the list goes on. You've been 30 years in the business, so where would you like to start, man? You want to go down memory lane?
Well, yeah, I'm very fortunate in that my career's had a lot of different facets to it. Not only just the in-ring stuff, which I guess is maybe the easiest touch point for people. I spent 10 years working for the wrestling magazines back in the heyday of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and The Wrestler. There's the people that I've trained, right? There's the coaching aspect of what I do. That even includes my YouTube channel, Till We Make It. And then there's books that I've written. So there's also that piece of it. So it's down to where your interests lie, because chances are, if it's got to do with wrestling, I've probably done it. And I mean that from a place of feeling very grateful to have been afforded so many opportunities, as opposed to like, man, am I sick and tired of this? If I was sick and tired of wrestling, I think I'd have changed what I was doing quite some time ago.
I mean, yeah, that's true, man. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 9 or 10 books you've done.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, I think there's 10 books on wrestling. My first came out in 1998. My most recent came out during the pandemic, and I'm writing number 11 right now. It's really designed to help fledgling wrestlers to have their best matches ever. So it digs kind of beneath the surface of what we'll call like the musculature of moves. Mm-hmm. To the skeleton. What's the bones underneath? How do you tell a good story in the ring? How does it pay off in a satisfying climax that really gets the audience to appreciate your finish? I really want to break that apart and codify it so the next generation has an easier time putting on the matches people are going to love.
Yeah. Where does one even start to write a book? Let alone one, but maybe 11. Where does one even start?
Mostly from boredom, Jordan. Just from abject boredom. The first one I wrote, Fantastic Finishers, came out while I was working for the wrestling magazines, and it was assigned to me as a task. I was told to write 96 pages of text. And at the time I thought, that's going to take the rest of my life. 96 pages? At university, I think maybe the longest paper I ever did was 10 pages long, maybe. 96 pages felt like a death sentence. Wow. But the truth is, once you've done it once, you realize like there is a cycle to this. As I'm going through now in my 11th book cycle, there's a cycle to this. I'm going to spend 6 to 9 months just doing the first draft. I'm going to spend a couple more months revising, editing. Along the way, some of my favorite parts are probably going to get cut out because they don't serve the book anymore. But it's just a cycle, like anything else, right? Whatever your day job is, right? There's probably a cycle. This is what I do the first half hour when I come into the building. This is what I'm doing, in the middle of the day. This is what it's like toward the end of my shift when I want to look busy so my supervisor doesn't bother me, but I'm actually doing something else or whatever your cycle is. It's the same with the books.
I mean, 11 books though. How long does it take you to roughly make one?
I'd say it's about a year cycle. Each one is about a year cycle. Only my second one took longer because I didn't know what I was doing. I had no editor. I had nobody that was kind of saying, stop writing about this and just move on to the next topic. I didn't have anybody helping me then, but I've gotten much better at it as the years have gone on, just like anything else. The first time you do a project at work, it's never going to be as good as the 10th one. It'll never be as good as the 20th one. And that's the same is true of writing a book.
So you mentioned obviously you've been with Pro Wrestling Illustrated. How did that come about?
Yep, way back in the day. So I think I got hired from them in the spring of 1998 because in the infancy of the internet, there were very few wrestling websites. There were few ways to interact with pro wrestling on the internet. There were like news groups, there was a message board, and that really was it. And I started contributing like a travel log to like one of the 4 wrestling websites that existed back then. Well, unbeknownst to me, the people at Pro Wrestling Illustrated were reading it every week. And after 5 or 6 months, they said, "Do you want to just come and do this for us in the magazines?" And the publicity I got from being in the magazines every single month helped give me a massive leg up over my entire generation of independent wrestlers. All the other guys that broke in the mid 90s did not have that working for them like I did. And um, I can't even express what a boost that gave me, that even to this day, sometimes people come up to me and say, "I used to read your column in the magazines for years." It boggles my mind.
I mean, it's one of the highlights of your career. Like you mentioned, you've done 10 books, PWI, you've been a wrestler yourself, you've spent time in Shikara, CZW, amongst other promotions in the United States. You've even spent a little time in the UK, if I'm mistaken.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's probably one of my 3 favorite places to wrestle because I'm so enamored of the classic world of sport style, the really clean, classy style of Johnny Saint and Johnny Kidd and Steve Gray and Mike Flash Jordan and those guys. As my style has evolved in the ring over the years, it is increasingly cut from that British cloth. So I especially love when I get to do that where it lives, where it's kind of like right into the DNA. To do one of those very throwback classic 70s and 80s British matches in front of like a drunk crowd in Philadelphia is very, very different than the reception it gets when
Yeah.
I'm in Manchester, England.
So when was the last time you was back over in the UK?
I wrestled in the UK last year, and I was doing some coaching as well. Yep. Yeah, it was last April. I was up in the north. And there's a half decent chance I'll be back in September. There's a couple companies, including one on the Isle of Wight, that are kind of collaborating on the possibility of having me back. So I would very much look forward to that. Because as I said, it's one of my very favorite places to wrestle in the world.
I mean, being a pro wrestler and being in the job that you've been in over the years, you must have been and seen some places, different
Right.
countries from around the world.
Yeah, I think I've wrestled in maybe 15 or 16 different countries.
Wow.
So I feel very fortunate to have seen so much of the world on wrestling's dime. The first real international break I ever got was wrestling in Germany in 2003. And this is before WXW rose to become the juggernaut that it is now in the European scene. It was actually in danger of collapsing. It was on the brink of implosion when myself, Chris Hero started wrestling there, and a Swiss guy named Claudio Castagnoli was just having his very first matches. So it was a very different scene. Nevertheless, getting to see Germany as a wrestler was not just one of the great joys of my career, but of my life.
Mm. So you mentioned 15 countries. You've been in the business for 30 years. What is some of the highlights of your career, you would say?
They're mostly lowlights, Jordan. They're mostly lowlights. But if we had to try and come up with a couple, generally speaking, I am not a fan of my own matches. But there are a few that I think have held up well. Back in 2011, Eddie Kingston and I had our one and only singles match in the main event of a pay-per-view that was called High Noon. And one, I'm very proud of my protege. Eddie's gone on to do great things in AEW. Right now, he's waiting on recuperation from a very serious leg injury. Nevertheless, I think that match holds up well. There's definitely a handful that I've done internationally. At least one that I wrestled against Johnny Kidd in the UK that I'm very proud of. There is at least one in the very early days of Claudio's career that we did for WXW in a dirty little nightclub in Essen, Germany, where the atmosphere just couldn't be beat. Although, I think the one we're probably best known for is from the Ted Petty Invitational Tournament in 2006. That is the one where the clip of the finish seems to go viral again every year under the name Best Match Finish Ever. You may have even seen it and not realized that's me. I'm the guy in the white pants. But athletically, I'm very proud of the performance in that match.
Yeah.
Having said as much, I'm frequently the guy that just nitpicks his own stuff to death. I'm like, oh, that should have been better. That could have been crisper. Why didn't I make that choice? Something that I think I will remain proud of for some time to come is a speech I gave at a conference called Ignite Philly 16. So this was 8 years ago now, but it is very much my own belief and distillation of my passion for pro wrestling. And just hearing me say that out loud, you might think, oh, I don't know that I've ever seen that, but perhaps you have. I was lucky enough that there were some of the real luminaries in the wrestling business, from Seth Rollins to Alexa Bliss, who were circulating that video when it was current at the time. And a lot of people did get to see it. When I watch it back, I think, on that day, I really was on my game. I guess that one counts as a highlight.
Mm. So you've been in the business, like you've said, 30 years. What would you say has changed over the years, to what wrestling is now?
It's virtually unrecognizable now, Jordan. From what it was when I broke in May of 94 to where we are as we're sitting here now, it's July of 24. I often think about the transition. So a little context. I think there have been 4 eras of pro wrestling. There's the carnival era, there's the territory era, the cable TV era, and now the social media era. But when I broke in, it was the cable TV era. It's right before the Monday Night Wars begin. The cable TV ended, that era ended, give or take, let's say 2010. And a lot of this is spurned on by the mobile phone revolution, smartphones, etc. But now we're in the social media era of wrestling. And so
Yeah.
much of it, the values, what constitutes wrestling, so much of it has changed. Like I said, it at times feels unrecognizable. And that is, there's a pro and a con to that. The con is the way I was brought up in wrestling, the things I was taught. These are our values. This is how it's done. These are the things you would never do. These are the things you always do. They're almost completely irrelevant today. What the pro of that is it's a brand new landscape waiting to be discovered. It allows for certain types of things which never would have passed muster back in the 90s. There is so much room for creativity, for innovation, and for wrestling to change its form that there never was before. I don't think in the 90s you could have, for example, made a wrestling company that had a heavy science fiction hand, where all the wrestlers are from outer space and some of them are aliens, and the entire set looks like that. Maybe the entranceway is a giant UFO that they park. You could absolutely make that show now. If you tried that in the 90s, it would have never flown. It just wouldn't have. So the possibilities, I think, are one of the most exciting things about this current era.
I see what you mean with all that. And obviously, just before the Monday Night Wars and stuff, and then cable TV, your WCW, and then now you've got the social media and PG era and stuff like that. And I really do see where you're coming from with that. Like, stuff back in the day you wouldn't get away with what doing now, and then stuff now you won't get. It's really weird how the world is with professional wrestling right now.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's going through a very difficult transition period now.
Yeah, and there's also, obviously, as a ex-PWI and writer and illustrator and stuff like that, you must, when you see like WWE and AEW and other companies, you must watch them and think, you want to do this, you want to do that. What would you say that WWE's doing from your perspective and your 30 years in the business? What would you say that WWE's doing wrong now? And then what would you also say that AEW is doing wrong, if you could?
Well, to be honest about it, because I work as a consultant in wrestling, I watch very little wrestling unless I'm paid to watch it anymore.
Okay, I like
that. Right. And I mean, I if you know some of the people who I've trained throughout the years, you'll realize so many of my kids now are exactly who you're watching on TV. So I'm very, very careful because, one, in a wrestling sense, I mean, those are my kids making wrestling right now on TV.
Yeah.
I do find it very difficult to interface with wrestling simply for my own enjoyment anymore. I would say a major downside of it having been my career choice for so long is when I do watch it, often all I can see are the flaws. And, I spent a long time doing, coaching and other consulting type work for the Performance Center for WWE. I would say if I was going to kind of broadly maybe address something that I think could be viewed as a negative, is the homogenization of style that happens in the Performance Center. To go back a step to like the era that I love best of WWF, when the mid card was filled out with these phenomenal talents from Jake the Snake Roberts to Mr. Perfect to the Hart Foundation and the Rockers, etc., there was still enough stylistic nuances that I could watch a guy from Minnesota and he does not give a hip toss the way a guy trained in Florida does. Like these are your AWA guys, and those are the guys who started under Dusty, and these are the guys who worked for Vince Sr., and none of them do it exactly the same. And that gave you a flavor. It's spices, right? It's a little secret ingredient that makes the wrestling feel different. So again, I mean this very broadly. Something that the Performance Center has changed about everyone that you see on NXT, and then eventually the ones that trickle all the way up and make it onto the main stages, they've all been trained roughly the exact same way by the exact same people. So these little flavors, these little spices that make wrestling extra delicious are gone. Now, I understand why. The more these people train together, the lower the injury rate is likely to be. And the WWE is a big company that has to think about return on investment. If they put a lot of money into Jade Cargill, but Jade Cargill gets injured and is sitting on the sidelines for 4 months, they're investing a ton of money in someone who's not making them a return on investment. Injury is bad for any wrestling company, but especially when you're as high stakes as WWE, a publicly traded company that has to answer to shareholders. I get why you want minimal injury. I get why you want everyone trained the exact same way. But I think sometimes when I'm watching it, I feel like, is this why I find this a little boring? Is that what it is? And I was in the belly of the beast. I kind of think it is.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that. It's exactly what you're saying. Do you know what I mean? If someone's getting trained under the same person, you're going to see the exact same from, say, for example, Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. You're just going to see the exact same from them. So I see where you're coming from with that.
And, hearing you say that made me realize the role that agents and producers play in that as well. If there's only a handful, like there is at AEW, if there's only a handful of agents, and, I'll just pick somebody who I happen to admire and respect a whole heck of a lot, Jerry Lynn. Jerry Lynn's one of the backstage agents there. If he produces 6 of the 12 matches on a show, they're all going to have roughly that Jerry Lynn feel to them. And that too contributes to a sense of homogenization. And I love Jerry Lynn. I love Dean Malenko. There's a lot of people working backstage at AEW. They are far more talented than I will ever be. But it definitely detracts from the variety that we are seeing in the ring. And one of the great joys of wrestling, especially when you watch a super card, whether it's a WrestleMania or it's an all-in, is the variety.
Yeah. I see where you're coming from with that. So your YouTube channel, let's talk about that. You are 21K subscribers. Quite impressive.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've been working on the Till We Make It project for the last 5 years. And it's all tutorials aimed to help the next generation of pro wrestlers have all the tools they need when they need them. There is so much in wrestling that goes unspoken, like these strange old traditions you're just expected to know. Well, if no one teaches you, how are you going to know these things? There's so many secret mechanics, behind the scenes nuances and details that it's key for people to understand to do their best work in the ring. And if you don't have that available to you, you're going to make every mistake in the book, like I did. If I'd had all this information available to me during my formative years, I think I would have gotten a lot closer to reaching my career goal. And looking back on it now, here I am, 30 years deep. I feel like it's passed me by. my ability to appear at one of the Super J Cup tournaments, my ultimate career aspiration, it has slipped through my fingers. And if through the work of Till We Make It, all these video tutorials, there's six, right before you and I got on, I filmed the 650th of these.
Wow.
If these help people to get closer to achieving their goals, then the whole endeavor has been worthwhile.
650th. That's a mile. It's a 21K, so 650th one. That is a achievement itself, man.
So if you're not tired of hearing me talk about wrestling yet, boy, is there a lot of it on YouTube.
Literally. And I mean, you must get so much feedback from the YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'm always stunned when I hear from someone in a place that I didn't know they had wrestling saying, we all watch your videos here. That just leaves me shocked. I actually had communication with 2 wrestlers in the country of Nepal last week. If you'd gone back 30 days ago and said, Mike, do you think there's wrestling in Nepal? I'd be like, probably not. And I'm not 100% sure I could find it on a map. Yeah, apparently so. And apparently they watch
Really?
Till We Make It. So in many ways, what I do with the Till We Make It project will reach so much further than anything I ever wrote and anything I ever contributed in the ring as a wrestler.
So it's amazing, man. And I subscribed when I first. When did I subscribe? I subscribed a couple of months ago, and I was like, do you know what? This guy's onto something. This guy is amazing. And then you do more research and stuff, and I was like, friggin' hell, man, this guy is talented. And I came across the video with Eddie Kingston that you mentioned, and Chikara, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That it was
Yep, that's
for,
right.
yeah. And you mentioned 2011. Quite. I don't think that match gets as much credit as it should.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I'm really, whenever I look back on one of those, I feel like I'm glad to see that it holds up, right? Because wrestling tastes evolve quickly. What was
Very.
once really cool can now look really lame and cringy. So I'm proud of that one. And I'm even prouder to see how far Eddie has gone since then. It was great watching him develop as I trained him and saw him come up. It's even greater to see him now on the main stage, living out his life's dream.
Yeah. So you are now, should we say, semi-retired professional wrestler.
Mm-hmm. Sure, that's fair to say.
Who would you want to be your final opponent if you could have one?
Well, someone I've always wanted to have a singles match with, who I admire tremendously, and we've never had the chance to wrestle one-on-one, is Christopher Daniels. And I believe Christopher Daniels is also maybe tiptoeing towards semi-retirement. We haven't checked in lately, but my admiration for him has gone undiminished since the 90s. And somehow we've just never been able to make it happen. I think of him as almost like my analog from the West Coast of the United States. At the same time I was coming up along the East Coast, he was coming up along the West Coast. And I also think of him as being a more talented wrestler than I am. So the opportunity to test myself against him is one I would really relish.
Yeah, that would be a good one. Because Christopher Daniels is around about the same age as being in the business with you as well.
Yeah.
A long time. Who is your Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling?
Well, I feel very lucky in that I got to meet and wrestle all of my heroes in wrestling except for Owen Hart.
Oh, wow.
So I suppose if I had to put them up on the board, certainly Owen Hart is there. Jushin Thunder Liger. He's the reason I wanted to do this. He's the reason I'm still doing this. He's my inspiration and my idol. I would not be here without Jushin Thunder Liger. No one made wrestling more beautiful. No one made me feel like that is my calling, the way watching Johnny Saint wrestle does. When I watch Johnny Saint, I think it is the purest distillation of the craft in the way I love it. So I got to put him. And perhaps because, not just because I got to team with her, but even if I'd never met Manami Toyota, Her incredible work ethic is a reminder to me that there are no nights off. So I'd put up Owen Hart, Jushin Thunder Liger, Johnny Saint, and Manami Toyota. That's my 4.
That is a good list, man. Good list, especially Owen and Jushin and Johnny Sin. Really good list.
Yeah.
Really good list. So what else is in store for Mike in 2024? Because we're 6 months in. We've just done your 650th episode, 21K subs. You know, you've been 30 years in the business. So what's next for Mike?
Probably a long nap. I'm going to have a little bit of a lie down, maybe a very strong cappuccino. And then very shortly, I'm going to be hitting the road very hard. So I've already lined up. There's about 10 different places all across North America where I'm going to be teaching. And then I'm jumping to a different continent. Those dates are not yet locked in, and I'm going to be doing roughly the same thing, which is I visit a wrestling school. I usually am in residence there for 3 or 4 days. I'll teach maybe 8 classes while I'm there, and then I move on to the next city. And that starts just a little bit later this month. I'm going to hit the first, I'm down in the Carolinas. Then I'm headed up to Canada. I'm in Montreal, Quebec. I'm down to Alabama. I just start crisscrossing all of North America. And then by the fall, I'm going to start heading abroad as well, doing the exact same thing. As many wrestling schools that are interested, I'm probably coming. And if you wait long enough, I'll probably be at one near you.
Definitely, yeah. You definitely will be in the UK pretty soon. And that, need to make sure I meet you, man. It'll be a good one.
It'd be a real pleasure, Jordan.
So I ask all my guests to do an inspirational message to end the video. What would yours be, Mike?
An inspirational video. Oh my. That's a very good question. I suppose this has broader applications than just wrestling. So even if you don't interface with the world of wrestling, other than as a fan, presumably, or you're probably not paying attention to this particular podcast, it doesn't really matter what it is that you're doing. But I would invite you to remember this. There's always going to be someone in any equation, your workplace, maybe in your group of friends. Maybe you are in wrestling. Maybe you're training right now to be a pro wrestler. In any group like that, there are going to be people, they have certain advantages. And you will never enjoy the exact same advantages nor the exact same disadvantages as anybody else. So if you're trying to compare your own path, your own progress, your own success to someone else's, it will never be a fair comparison. You don't have their advantages. You don't have their exact disadvantages. So run your own race. Remember, the only person you have to measure yourself against is you. As long as you're doing better today than you were doing yesterday, no matter what your job is, whether your job's in wrestling or your job is not in wrestling, the only fair measuring stick for your own success is you. Don't look to others. Don't imagine because the person across the hallway got the promotion at work before you did. These things don't matter because they have advantages and disadvantages. You don't. Instead, focus on being your own measuring stick. Run your own race. There is no one who can measure your success except you.
Do you know what? That was amazing. Do you know what? You couldn't have said it any better myself. The words, very wise man you are, Mike. Very wise man.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me on. This was a real pleasure.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Take care, mate. Bye.
All right. Cheers.